Welcome back to Potter's Pockets, episode 17, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, chapters 9 and 10. We experienced grim defeat, as well as the Marauder's map, and Fred and George at the best, as it were. And so back with me are my esteemed colleagues, Miss Sarah Miller and Wes Schantz. Welcome back, y'all.
Hey.
Welcome back.
It's great to hear from you. And so we had quite a cadre of firsts in this most recent couple chapters, didn't we? We saw Harry for the first time lose in Quidditch, and again, I suppose, find himself on the receiving end of being the hero, not being the hero. Cedric Diggory is to be the hero now, and I guess he has something now to empathize with Ron about. It's something I wrote in my book, just being overshadowed in the moment. And then also we get sort of what seems like the ultimate tool in the Marauder's map. And so leading up to this ultimate revelation for Harry about his relationship to Sirius Black and the true nature of his connection with him, I suppose. And so, well, what do you guys want to start with tonight?
Yeah, that whole backstory is, again, it sort of goes back to one of the first pages of the first book where we hear Sirius Black mentioned, and Hagrid even alludes to that here. He says, really, really loudly in the bar, how he should have torn that murderous coward apart limb from limb, but instead he just borrowed his flying motorcycle. So I found that really interesting, that it sort of reaches way back to the beginning of the book. It's filling in some of the backstory, and then how Harry goes and has a look at his album that Hagrid gave him of all the pictures of his father, and he finds the picture of Sirius Black at their wedding.
Right. And so in learning this information about Sirius Black, now we understand why James Potter would have asked Harry in the first place not to go after Sirius Black. And once he came to know that there was a blood feud with Sirius, that not only was he directly involved in the murder, purposefully, but indirectly involved in the murder of James and Lily Potter. He didn't pull the trigger, as it were, but in Harry's current view of him, which will be just as wrong as his current view of Snape tends to be, he thinks, well, he will hate this man precisely for the fact that he was the friend who betrayed his friends, who did the unthinkable. I don't know if it seems like an archetype. Is there anything worse than that? The best friend who is inseparable from the other, who then sells out the other. And I'm sorry if my microphone's making a bunch of noise.
No, it's fine. It does seem like it's sort of curious how this was prepared for, in a way, right? From the very start. Maybe that's something like what you're describing, an archetype, like that's sort of built into the story somehow. And yet the way that we actually overhear it is it's sort of humorous, right? Like the way that Hagrid, Fudge, McGonagall, and is it Flitwick, the four of them sort of come into the bar and are just apparently just like catching up with the bartender there, and that's how Harry finally overhears this critical information from behind the Christmas tree. I just thought it was a really funny scene.
Yeah, talk about a gift of information. I think we had talked last time about how people seem to want to keep him in the dark about things, and he gets this unusual Christmas present here of like information about the past, and it's not pleasant information. It's not information that is probably it's probably not easy to accept some of it as true or as as like without being somewhat outraged. But it is kind of cool how it does happen at Christmas. I agree. I noted that in the book, how like, what a nice touch. It didn't have to be that. What a nice touch.
Well, it's interesting too because it's sort of like his Christmas gift is sort of like the ultimate Christian gift, which is a gift of betrayal, right? Just sort of like Jesus, though not on Christmas, closer to Easter, was betrayed by his own apostle, um, Judas Iscariot. And so it's like the story within the story is that this is a story not only about walking the path of the hero, but also about the other great story in human existence, which is a best friend betraying his best friend and going the path of evil. Though that will ultimately not be what the book concludes.
Yeah.
But that is, we are led to some dark beliefs at this moment, right? The Grimm showing up several times now, prefiguring major accidents or potential major accidents for Harry, as well as I'm sorry, I'm losing my train because of this terrible feedback I'm getting. Can you guys hear this?
Yeah, more or less, yeah. Can you, Wes?
In and out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I lose my train, it's because I can't get over that, and I'm sorry. I've got to be a little more pro about this and get through the technological issues. So I'll try and set my intention for that. But so what was I saying about the Grimm? I'm sorry. That it prefigures a major accident for Harry, and I'm sorry. I don't know where I was.
Well, I guess it seemed like you were kind of connecting that with the way that Sirius is portrayed as this Judas figure, but how that's gonna turn out to not be the case. And I guess he's gonna turn out to be this Grimm who keeps showing up. So a figure that seems to be of death turns out to be this father figure ultimately, right? This
right.
this protector.
We have a portrayal of, or we have a darkness or a night sea journey, a descent to the underworld. The tone is dark. The Dementors are showing up. The Grimm defeat, an actual defeat. Seeing the Grimm, learning this terrible revelation about Sirius Black, and yet there is some hope and some good times in here, right? He does get the Marauders back. Harry does, and he does get to go to Hogsmeade and get to go to Honeydukes. And imagine Dudley's piggly little self looking at those desserts. But it is interesting that the darkness does prefigure the dawn in this book, because it does end on a very high note. And in fact, the idea of a Patronus and having to harness a very happy thought in order to balance out the darkness of a traumatically dark one seems to also be that symbol and a ball that that the way to fight the darkness is through the light, and that the path through the darkness leads to the light, or the path through the very difficult time leads to the positive, hopeful time again, like Dante's Inferno ending with the stars. And that, so I'd say that this book broadly seems to be taking the path of Dante. The way down is the way up, in an Inferno-esque way. And we seem to be in the Inferno now, not the Purgatory or Paradiso.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, so many things go wrong for them in that chapter, the Grimm defeat, right? Like, and so many things go wrong for them in a way that feels like unfair. It doesn't feel like, particularly in both the Quidditch match and in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, there just seemed to be like casualties everywhere that like they didn't. There are definitely times where Harry and Ron and Hermione even deserve like modification or 5 points from Gryffindor or whatever, but it feels like they're getting sucked down into circumstances of like injustice. And of course we haven't even gotten to the point where Buckbeak is sentenced to death, but like the fat lady, like what did she ever do to anybody? You know, Hermione, what did she ever do except have the right answer? Like Harry, what did he ever do except, you know, get on his broomstick and try to win a game? And I mean, like, they're facing these, I don't know, villain might be the wrong word, but they're facing these figures, be it Snape in the classroom or, you know, the Dementors, or fear that are beyond their desert. You know, it seems like, I don't know if that makes any sense. It certainly makes them seem like in a place of darkness where they've fallen down into the garbage chute and they don't know how to get out, and then all of a sudden it's compacting on them.
Yeah.
This feels like Belly of the Whale to me, but.
Well, Ron got that 50-point deduction for throwing what was it, a crocodile's heart at Malfoy's face. I mean, the symbolic importance of that I thought was excellent, that he won the game outside the game, even though he had 50 points taken from him. So they're fighting some sort of injustice, it seems. And yeah, like the Dementors showing up and messing up Harry, there's an injustice there. He has to mess with that image. If everybody else had that same thing, they'd all fall off their brooms too, and the game would not have been lost. But these sorts of injustices seem to be sort of the ones that you can't fight, the ones that just happen. Like, some people have endured worse moments than other people, and so they have to deal with that pain. And yes, it does have a more negative effect on them than it does on others. But ultimately, that's something they're going to have to fight themselves by means of producing a Patronus or a counter happy memory in order to sort of balance out their map of the world so that they can continue to be productive or live meaningful lives within it, and not go the path of Cain and think everything is evil and want to destroy, right?
Right.
Which is what we think Sirius did. Though actually it's a far more malevolent and fraudulent move. A truly malicious act by Peter Pettigrew. That fat boy who was never any good at dueling, says McGonagall.
Yeah, he's an interesting character here, because we hear like little hints about him, and it's still not nearly enough to piece it all together, I think. But we do hear that he sort of tagged along after these popular and talented students that he confronted Sirius there at the end, right? And was posthumously awarded the Order of Merlin First Class for his valor. But all that's left of him is a single finger, which is like delivered to his mom or whatever, right? And so I think, don't they say that he looked kind of like, maybe I'm reading ahead again with the photographs, that he looked kind of like Neville?
I think the connection is made.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. Like that sort of sums it up, right? Like that's all that needs to be said, since we know. And yet at the same time, the parallel between the two chapters I thought was really interesting, in that the first one has somehow, or the one where the fat lady has to run away, right? We have somebody sneaking into the castle somehow. No one can figure out how. And then we get the Marauder's map just a little bit later, that we're told, you know, there's these passages that have been discovered, and then there's these other passages that haven't. And it's like everyone sort of knows, like, that must be how Sirius Black got in, right? Like, but no one wants to say it. And I feel like it's kind of the same way with Peter Pettigrew and the mystery of how Sirius Black like escaped from Azkaban. Like the evidence is starting to pile up that something is weird here, you know. But no one can quite like look at it head on just yet. We haven't got quite enough to piece it all together.
And so, is the issue you're seeing that what we're not looking at is the fact that he is one of us and he knows our ways, and thus he knows the secret inner workings of the society and how to navigate it. So the very crimes that were committed against him by his friend Pettigrew that he was convicted of, he's now using those techniques in order to progressively infiltrate society, to come back into it in a in a way that would be considered malicious or hyper irrational in an evil way. What is it that you think that's
I'm not sure. I mean, it seems like to this point the information is all there, but no one has been able to sort of piece it all together yet. Like Ron knows that Scabbers is missing a claw or whatever, right? Like that tidbit of information is there, and that's of some concern to Ron. Now Hagrid knows that Sirius seemed like the kind of person who would never give up his friends, and that's sort of like just that much more shocking to him because he thinks that he did, right? But like if you and then we have the little story about Pettigrew's finger being the only thing left, right? So it's like the only person here who like knows what actually happened aside from Sirius is the narrator, is the reader with hindsight to be able to see each thing come up. And Sirius, right? Like we see that he's infiltrated the castle, and then a couple chapters later we see that there's this map that lets you find your way through secret passages that no one knows about except the Weasleys maybe, right? So there's enough hints now, and I don't know like if it's so much not being willing to look at the truth yet, or just that no one has actually assembled all of those tidbits yet.
Even though instinct has been leading that way the whole time through the avenue of the theriomorphic form of Hermione Crookshanks, right? Even his name Crook, like he can find the crook, he can root out the rat. He's known all along. He's been pointing at Peter Pettigrew, but we haven't been able to see what he's saying, as it were. That's interesting that sort of indicates what the full meaning of a film noir is that we're the ones in the dark the whole time. And so this is a story about we're in the dark until the great revelation that helps us understand the information that's been provided to us all along. The mystery.
And I would just add into that, I was just going to say, like, I think a really big part of putting together the exits and entrances pieces is understanding the relationship that we would have no way of knowing about Professor Lupin and all of the other boys. I think like knowing what we end up finding out, like so much of their like school age trickery came about as a consequence of keeping their friend company, right? And there are also clues that, again, like if you, in hindsight, it makes sense. Like in these chapters, we got the Bogart, and then Lupin is sick, and then he assigns an essay on werewolves. And recognizing them, like all of these cards are on the table. I don't really get the vibe that any of them right now are red herrings, but there's something about, I don't know, I guess maybe it's the degree to which they're emphasized or the order in which they're delivered or like the tone with which they're delivered that makes them like it makes the reader not see the netting that connects them all. I'm not sure.
And
Wes, do you think that's a weakness, or do you think it's a strength?
No, I mean, I think it's a real strength of the book that the main thing that seems to be brought forward really, really slowly throughout the series is information about what Harry's parents were like as kids or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that seems to be the thing, like to know his relationship to Sirius Black a little bit. And then we get a little later in the book a little more about their relationship with Lupin and then the truth about Peter. But it's only like in the last couple books that we finally get the whole story of what was going on between them and Snape, right? And like finally fill in some of his motivations. And so yeah, I think it's a really interesting like layering of the story that takes place where you are focused throughout the series on Harry, but the most important thing to understand what's happening here is to understand those people who were taken away from Harry, right? Like what they were actually like as people. I find that really
so
interesting.
like studying the past or coming to understand the past has a real like value for your present, which is interesting because obviously there will eventually be like this question about time in this book and how time functions. I never really thought about how, I mean, obviously, yeah, I've never really articulated just how important all of the dead characters are to the living, or like, and the relationships between the dead. But of course, that's just the same as it is here. You know, it sometimes goes unverbalized or underverbalized, but you know, if who we are is a combination of who we've encountered and who has loved us, then it'd be pretty hard to not think about all of the people who once loved one another when you weren't around, and all of the dynamics that went into making them who they were. That seems pretty significant.
Yeah, and just on the note of time rippling from the past into the present, and the same wave simply broadening out, it indicates the importance of the meaningful moments one has as a child as being that which defines one's character. Because Snape is now, if you were just to look at him entering the Defense Against the Dark Arts class and turning straight to the end of the book and then assigning a very difficult, long essay, you would think, what gives with Snape? Why is he acting like this? Like, usually he's bad, but he's reasonable in potions to some degree, you know, some mean comments. But when you understand that he hates Lupin because of how James and his cronies used to treat him, and now Lupin needs his help, he must see that as and with Sirius disgraced and now James dead, how complicated that relationship is, and how nastily he must feel for him, and how justly he must feel the deserts are that Lupin has gotten, and all of them have gotten. 2 of them now in his head dead, 1 of them utterly disgraced and on the run, and 1 of them a werewolf, and he's the best of all of them at this point. And he's, you know, despicable as far as magic folk are concerned. And now who has the upper hand? The potion master, Snape. And so he really lords that over Lupin. He's like, man, he hasn't gotten here yet. And it's like, it's so heavy-handed. Just as some Anna Colathon, it just seems so heavy-handed of him to turn straight to that last chapter too, unless he's like feeling some serious hate or something like that. Because why would he be trying to out Lupin in that way? I suppose it makes some sense in the past, but even still, not very subtle.
And I think it's interesting how he like snaps at Hermione, who actually can do the very thing that and kind of already has recognized the very thing that he wants them to all know. Like I definitely kind of wonder, does he really want to out Lupin and like what would that get him, I guess. That was extremely vindictive, the way that he organized that class.
Yeah.
Not just to his own colleague. It was a vindictive against the students, which I thought was like really yucky. Like normally he's just
points from Hermione, right?
Yeah, for knowing the right answer, right? For being an insufferable know-it-all. Like normally he's biased and strict.
Yes.
Like every teacher has favorites. If they say that they don't, they're lying. And he normally plays favorites and is strict, but he's not. And he's passive aggressive, but there's always a line. And in that scene, maybe I just was reading for it because you asked us a question via text, Alex, about like when have we been unfair the way he has or he is, like when have we really harped on a student or felt like we were one of those kids. And so maybe I was just reading especially for it, but like that, I thought his behavior as a sub like really crossed the line. Also because he was disparaging of his other colleagues in a way that I thought was like, that crossed the line to me. And I didn't know if it was because maybe he feels like he has to keep Lupin healthy and he resents that somebody is as good as he is and yet a werewolf. Maybe there's like I'm not entirely sure what that was about, but it seemed out of character even for him. What did you guys think?
Yeah, Wes, what did you think? And also I would add in there, Draco's been pretty nasty too in this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He's really stepping up the taunting quite a bit. He's so yeah. What do you think of that scene as a teacher, as a person, as a reader, as you?
Yeah. Also, the worst thing about Malfoy here is that he keeps faking that his arm hurts to the point where they switch the Quidditch matchup, right? And that's just like so bad, ill sportsmanship, like to the extreme. And so they've been training to like play against this one style of play, and now they're going to be switched it up to play against this totally different team, right? And it's like the worst day ever. It's the rainiest. Anyway. So there's that. And then as far as Snape, the suggestion seems to be that maybe this is a red herring or whatever, but like that he's still mad about the boggart and how Lupin taught Neville how to make it ridiculous, right? Because it came in the form of Snape, and then Neville ridiculoused it and killed it with laughter. And even so I think later on Dumbledore alludes to that as well with his with their feast at Christmas.
Does that mean, Wes, that what Lupin brings back is like the memories of the humiliation of Snape? That's what he hates so much about him. That scene is an embodiment, now that we have context, of Snape's entire time at Hogwarts because of James and Sirius, particularly. The laugh of him being humiliated by them, and now they're friends.
Yeah. But two things about that, right? Like one, how would Snape have found out about this? It wasn't like any of the kids are gonna run to his office and be like, "You wouldn't believe what happened in Professor." I mean, maybe it was.
But isn't it described as ringing throughout the halls as if everybody knows it? Like I think the language, I would have to see the language, but I think it is described as like everybody was talking about it. And so
in that case, it really sounds like he's reverting to like a high school, you know, as I think we all do when there are certain triggers, right? On the other hand, like if I was Snape, I would also think like, damn, like I am the single most frightening thing that kid can think of. I have done my job, right?
That's right.
I mean, isn't that kind of what he wanted to be to Neville all along? I mean, in that case, it does really seem like it is sort of like this gut reaction, instinctive reversion to something he was when he was in middle school. But yeah, I think it's interesting too that like they won't cancel the Quidditch match because of rain, but Slytherin can say, "Oh, I can't play." Like they couldn't possibly find a backup.
It's absurd.
And also like that to me is just like a little socioeconomic commentary about the ways in which the rich and the privileged have like the uber wealthy and the uber privileged just play by a different set of rules. Like and sometimes the rules aren't even prescribed. They just choose not to abide by the rules that everybody else abides by, and in so doing construct a new set. Anyway, but that I'm curious what you were all thinking about Snape's rage.
It's also his the other thing about him, right, is that he sends Ron to clean the bedpans in the hospital wing, right? And so if Lupin is sick, then that's where Lupin would be, right? And so it's almost like, he seems to be trying to get people to figure out that something else is going on, without coming out and telling them, like, Lupin is a wolf, right? Like, but still, he's doing everything within his power to put him on blast.
When he's saying that he's a wolf, is he trying to disparage his character because they're looked down upon, or is he trying to alert them to a real threat, like a real defense against the dark arts teacher? Would be my real question, because he has known the firsthand effects of the savageness of young men, right? James and Sirius did a real number on him, and Lupin was one of them. He was their friend. And so is he trying to get them to see that he's not just this good man, but that they should maybe look at the state of his life for some evidence of the sort of person he could be?
I think that's got to be part of the motivation, and it's a really interesting like image to think about the werewolf, right? Because it's another one of these beings which is like a mixture of two other beings. The hippogriff is like that, of course, right? It's got the griffin itself on the Gryffindor crest or whatever. So the idea that like any symbol has just one meaning, it seems like is part of Snape's sickness, right? If he does see the wolf that way as like the savagery of young people or something, like that's because he's not seeing the other valence of the symbol, or like the many possible ways to see that symbol or something like that.
Well, no, how do you perceive the werewolf? Like my first idea of it would be like the uncontrolled anger that can overwhelm a person, and this is somebody that has not achieved, or I don't know, is afflicted in such a way that they cannot control their anger, and so they'll just turn on people. Whereas, the animagacies or the animagi are people who sort of integrate that aggression and thus harness it to their own will, like Animorphs from those books when we were younger. That seems to be the same idea. But, I mean, what is your take on what a werewolf is, or y'all's take on what a werewolf is?
I think the other part about it is that it's precisely not chosen, right? It's like this is a kind of curse that he bears, and he's transformed by certain forces outside of himself at certain times. And so there's the tiny element to it, and there's the unwilled, the necessity of it, the obligation almost. Right? So those kinds of things, and that would be precisely like the most unfair thing, right? Like for Snape to only see the unfairness of his own treatment, and then to miss how like painful that suffering would be for Lupin, and how kind his friends were to accompany him in that. It's like, again, he's seeing part of it, but not the other side of it.
That's a really good point, that Snape has been sort of twisted by his treatment by them to only see them in one way, and that the sickness is occupy one perspective, and to have the sort of aloofness or pride to only perceive from that perspective, because that does seem to be Snape's problem, right? He doesn't seem to connect well with others, and that, like we've been talking about, seems to be rooted in his past, in the fact that these meaningful moments when he was young defined his character in such a way as to make him oily, and he's still that little boy, to not to be Freudian about it, but to just mention that he is still sort of odd and off-putting, and still a gifted student, but now a teacher, and is very much a Slytherin, and that he's not fair. And yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, Wes, you made the point that there's something about the werewolf condition that's like not chosen, but sort of a curse. And I wonder if like Snape's, I don't know, you just said, Alex, he's a really smart man, right? He's not so stupid as to not know what's going on within himself, I would imagine, but maybe, I mean, we've all had moments where I mean, maybe I'm just speaking from the eye, but I think I speak for most people when I would say that we've all had moments where we've snapped at people, where someone pushes our buttons, they expose our greatest weaknesses, and they and our greatest fears, and these deep emotionally set triggers, and you're exposed, and so you react with like kind of bestially. And what if that is also what he is doing, right? And like part of his anger is his knowledge that he should be better than this. Like the pain that he's endured should yield compassion for the pain of others, but it somehow hasn't turned that way for him.
I've got it. Yeah, you hit it. He is just like Lupin, because he has not integrated.
I think he really is.
That's right.
I think he really is. It's
All
just
right.
not physical, the transformation.
Yeah. Let's start the second meeting. I'm going to send you the email now.
Okay.
All right, Sarah, you were saying you thought that you agreed that Professor Lupin and Snape were the same, but just not physically the same.
Or similar in like this, in our discussion of what a werewolf is. Somebody who's both like man and beast, but not by choice, is, I guess, more classically somebody who can't control a beast within, or the bestial parts of themselves.
Well,
that seems like definitely Snape.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because it leaves Snape as sort of a deformed hero, or an unformed hero, right? Because James, though a bully, masters his aggression and becomes the ability, he becomes Prongs. I love those names. Prongs because of antlers, because of a stag, a regal animal, because it has a crown, a Stephanos. And he gets the girl too, right? And he has the son, and the son even ends up being more famous than the father. So even in death, James is the super stud. He's like the Jesus as far as Snape is concerned. He has everything. He, maybe even Dumbledore loves him more. You know what I mean? And that's why he favors Harry. But, and so, it's just interesting to think of Snape in context of that. And that even though Snape might feel cast off, and this is reminding me of some Whitman that we read earlier, and also some Final Fantasy VII, his time still may yet come to walk the path of the hero, even though he saw that embodied by another person in his life, which had to be a humiliating thing to witness, because it was not, him in the mirror. And it's almost like that's something we have to overcome as we grow up, thinking that other people who are better than we are at different things are the hero, rather than we all walk the path of the hero to produce a better world. I would say that was an inhibiting fact growing up for me. It's like people seem so great. It seems so hard to compete. And so, it is interesting to see what Snape has become, so overcome with rage because he's refused to overcome these facts. And that, those seem to be the two ways of it, that there's no neutral middle ground.
And I guess I really liked Wes. I liked how you framed like the idea that he's not able to see the alternative valence, I think was the word. But I remember, if I could just sort of less about, serious questioning and more about personal experience, but I guess I remember reading the books the first time, and I remember hating Snape. And I think it's a wonderful trick or move in the narrative to force the reader to be in the same judgmental position of like completely, like, we all see the world in, like, obviously through our own eyes, and those lenses can have shades on them or blinders, and we can consistently fail to see like the whole of reality if we've already made a judgment as to who someone is. And when you get to book 7, really, like the valence of who the character is just fundamentally shifts, because you finally get like a view into somebody else's world. I think the pensieve is such a rich way to make that happen, but it really does seem like honoring the context of somebody else and preconceiving goodwill. I know that that's like a super Ignatian term, but I still believe that because St. Ignatius and Harry Potter have the same birthday, and you, Wes, that like that you guys all have a lot in common. But like Snape, it doesn't seem can presuppose goodwill, like he of anybody, right? And yet, as a consequence, we don't either for him.
Yeah.
Right.
We
imitate.
And I just think that that's such a great arc that she plays on, like basically like a trick she plays on us by the end to remind us that like, oh, you thought this guy was out. You thought he was irredeemable. He was like completely on the outside. Like, guess what? You were wrong. Everybody belongs on the inside.
Yeah.
I think that's the trick of narrative too. And I recently read an article about this. A historian talking about a flaw of history is that it's narratives, and so it often leaves out certain information that if it were to speak from a different perspective, it would include. And so part of how we perceive Harry Potter is through the perception of like a 13-year-old boy. And so he perceives the world in like the Marauder's map in like a fairly superficial way. And actually the Marauder's map might be something more sophisticated than that. I'm interested to see what y'all think it is. Is it a map of society as it is? Is it Harry's map of reality that's now filling up? But we see Snape in this typological way, like an antagonist. And we only seem to be seeing the bad things about him and none of the good until the end. I wonder to what extent that was because he was because we perceive him through Harry's eyes, and Harry is perhaps even more judgmental than Snape, or projects that judgmental unfairness onto him because he's prejudged Snape from the very beginning wrongfully.
Yeah, well, I think the counterpart to that too is Dumbledore and his omnipotence, omniscience, etc. Right? Because we see Dumbledore here, kind of get caught on the hop by the Dementors, right? Like they've been posted around the school. He couldn't prevent it, and now the Dementors flow in to the Quidditch match and take up the whole field and almost kill Harry, right? And they tell us Dumbledore was really angry, right? Like no one has seen him that angry before. He snaps. He also has a limit, and that's pretty scary, right? To see that person that you totally trust and like think is capable of anything, really pushed to like react, to like show that raw anger and still not be able to really, prevent the thing that happened. And again, that's like one of the huge of course, spoiler alert coming up towards the end of the series where you see Dumbledore falter, and it sucks.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the raw emotion of that moment and imprecision of language is Ron's description, which is so lacking. Some silver stuff came out of his wand. It's funny. Ron is so indistinct in how he perceives things. He might also perceive it like that because it's such an emotional moment that he can barely actually see, and so he doesn't get a good idea of what comes out, but also because we might not know what to look for yet. So with Lupin, it's some silvery stuff, and also with him, we don't yet know the distinct forms of the Patronus or the Patroni. But I would have been really interested in knowing the form of Dumbledore's, but if he is a figure of God the Father, it would be sort of hard for him to have one too, because he'd be the embodiment sort of everybody's, right? So maybe it was just like a silver light. But that might be revealed what it is in some of the Pottermore trivia. But do either of you know about that?
Not a bit.
I don't. I would have guessed like a phoenix, but I could be wrong.
Right, that would be good. Yeah, I mean, Fox does seem to be a stereomorphic form, which also seems to be what a Patronus is. So that's that's good. The thing that has to be renewed, Father Society, right, by the living hero, which I think is even going to happen in Fantastic Beasts. I think I've said this before, but Dumbledore will say he can't fight Grindelwald. It's got to be the actual living person. I'm forgetting the name. What is the guy's name?
Newt.
I thought
Commander.
It was Commander. Yeah, Newt's Commander. Right. Newt the Sound.
What a beast.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Well, hey, y'all. I might have to shove off here, but do we want to say something about potentially going to this Norwest Con and representing Pottermore to the fans?
Yeah. Well, so I guess we're still waiting to hear back in what exact capacity we're going to be presenting, but it sounds like we will at least have some kind of panel there where we get to record a show, maybe get some audience participation, and have some fun with that. Being live in the same room for a change will be pretty neat, and that's in Seattle around Easter, I think. I forget the exact date, but yeah.
Yeah. Hey, is it the April 19, 2021?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. That's definitely Easter. Yeah. So, just heads up. So did we hear that we got a panel, or that we're invited to sign up as retreatants of sorts?
Yeah, the way that it was the reply was basically we are still figuring out the schedule, and maybe we can find places for you guys to be on various panels, but it sounds like at least we would be able to do the one presentation, which is just recording whatever point we're at in the books at that point as a show.
Cool. We could also do a bit of a backstory about it could be an extra episode, kind of here's why we did this, here's what we feel like we've gotten out of it as we go through this. It could be a little meta.
Oh yeah, definitely.
For metacognitive.
We could also present on what our project at large is and how we want to educate people. And we're just going to do that, and people can listen if they want to, and that's great because we live in the greatest age ever. We live in Hogwarts, or Hogsmeade at this point, I suppose. But we're professors, so there you go. Okay, well, so since I was reading a bit slowly this time, I'm kind of sheepish. I'm very Ron-like in this moment. Could we go to let's go to 14. I want to see some more Quidditch. I want to see if Harry can redeem himself.
So 11, 12, and 13?
Yeah, I think that'll be fun.
Cool.
All right.
That's good. I think that's good.
Mapping this.
Well, I think we still want to talk about the map.
Yeah.
Next time.
The one thing I would say that I think the map might be is itself a microcosm of what the book is. It's this because just as the map houses all the names and all the actions that everybody's taking within it, Albus Dumbledore paced this way. Harry was saying Descendio or whatever. So does this book contain all of that as well. And so it's like a guidebook for how things happen, and that's why fiction works and why we like it, or something like that. I just want to throw that out there to germinate, potentially, because that was my one good thought about the map so far. And I thought it was interesting that Harry appeared on it later, actually, just as a note. When Harry activates it, that's when he appears on it. So it's like you and the hero in the book share the same path as you're reading, which I think is the coolest idea ever, and maybe why video games work.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
I have to get going as well.
All right.
We'll talk about that next time. And until then, mischief managed.
Mischief managed.
Mischief managed. Later.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.